If you often feel weighed down by your flaws and worry you'll never be enough, listen to the story of a broken mirror that longed to reflect perfection. In a dusty antique shop at the edge of town lived a mirror named Myra, whose cracks told a story no one seemed to want to hear. The bell above the little shop door jingled softly as morning light spilled through the dusty windows, casting golden beams across wooden shelves lined with forgotten treasures. The air carried a faint scent of old paper, polished wood, and something faintly floral, like dried lavender tossed into the corner many years ago. Myra stood leaned against the back wall, wedged uneasy between a cracked porcelain vase and a faded painting of a stormy sea. Her silver edges were tarnished, and her glass was spiderwebbed with fine fractures that shimmered when the sun touched them just right. She wasn't a mirror like any other. Day after day, Myra would watch the handful of visitors who stopped inside, their faces curious, their fingers tracing the edges of delicate trinkets. Most looked briefly in her reflection, then turned away with a polite smile, as though a subtle discomfort edged their glance. Sometimes a child would peer into her glass, tilting their head, eyes wide, before running off to squeal about something shiny in another corner. But adults, especially, rarely met her gaze again. From her safe spot, Myra could see the small town beyond the shop's glass windows, the morning bustle with carts clattering over cobblestones, the baker setting fresh loaves on baskets outside, the slow shuffle of the old postman making his rounds. She liked to imagine what it would be like if she could step outside that cramped shop to feel the sun fully on her face. And yet, she knew her place was here, trapped between forgotten things. Myra remembered a time before the cracks. Back then, she reflected everything with perfect clarity. The hopeful eyes of a young woman tying scarfed hair, the proud smile of a little boy checking his crooked tie, the steady hands of a craftsman wiping sawdust from his brow. She was proud of the glimpses she gave, small windows into each person's world. But then, slowly, cracks appeared. A hairline fracture grew into a meandering web. A tiny chip caught the morning light like a jagged star. Each imperfection made her tremble inside, even if she held herself still. How can I show the truth when I'm shattered inside? She often wondered. Her maker, an old craftsman named Elias, had placed her carefully in the shop years ago after those cracks started to spread. Elias was a quiet man, with a knotted beard and kind eyes that seemed to carry the whole world's worries. Sometimes he would pause in front of Myra, running his rough fingers gently along her broken edges, whispering thanks for holding stories no one else would. But such moments were rare, and for the most part, Myra felt invisible among the gleaming antiques polished to perfection. Despite the cracks, Myra tried her best. Every morning, she caught the light and reflected the faces that came close. But deep inside, she held a growing ache, a harsh voice echoing louder with each passing day. You are too broken to be whole. No one wants to see what's fractured. One cold afternoon, the bell jingled and a woman entered, brushing snowflakes from her coat. She wandered slowly past shelves, almost as if she were searching for something meaning somewhere. Myra caught the woman's eyes, a quiet sadness wrapped gently around them like a shawl. The woman's hands rested briefly on the cracked vase nearby, then she paused in front of Myra, her reflection shattered into countless pieces, each fragment showing a different shade of tiredness or hope. For a moment, the woman looked away, her breath fogging the glass. Then she smiled softly, a smile that was worn but genuine. You look like me, she murmured, her fingers tracing the outline of one fracture. Almost perfect, but not quite. Myra didn't understand the words then, but something sparked inside her, a flicker of recognition. Here was someone who saw not just the brokenness, but the story inside it. Days passed. The woman returned, sometimes bringing a book or a small pot of wildflowers she'd gathered from the fields beyond town. She began to speak aloud, as if Myra could listen beyond the glass. I have scars no one asks about, she said one day, flipping the pages of a worn journal. Old mistakes, war wounds, moments I hide even from myself. They don't disappear with time. I learned to cover them, to pretend they don't matter. At those words, Myra felt the tightness of longing coil tighter within her. The woman's voice was a mirror to her own hidden fracture lines. One evening, the shopkeeper, a wiry man named Thomas, arranged the shutters as the sun dipped below the horizon. He glanced toward Myra and then chuckled. "You've been sitting too long, old friend. They don't want broken things, always chasing the shiny, the new, the perfect." His words hit Myra like a cold wind. She wanted to shout back, but these cracks hold everything that's real. Instead, she remained silent, the weight of his dismissal settling deeper in her. The woman left that night with a promise murmured to the air, "I'll be back tomorrow." Myra held onto those words like a fragile thread. But as the days grew shorter and colder, the mirror noticed a change in herself too. The cracks seemed to reflect not just fractures in glass, but fractures in her spirit. When she caught her own reflection, she almost didn't recognize it. Fractured light bent awkwardly between jagged edges, shadows where there should have been clarity. Yet inside, where no one could see, hope was stirring quietly. The woman returned again one drizzly afternoon, this time with a worn leather bag and a gentle determination. She placed a small, smooth cloth beside Myra and carefully began to wipe the surface of the mirror, her touch slow and respectful. Myra shivered as every grain of dust was lifted, every smudge erased, but the cracks remained, not hidden, but somehow less like wounds and more like lines tracing a complex map. "Sometimes we try to polish away what makes us unique," the woman said softly, "but the cracks, they tell our story better than any perfect surface." Outside, the rain tapped against the window pane like a steady heartbeat, and for the first time in many months, Myra felt something like warmth inside her fractured frame. But the world outside wasn't gentle. The townspeople whispered about the old shop and its broken mirror, calling it useless, unworthy, a relic no one needs. Myra heard the cold judgments the woman tried to shield her from, a heavy shroud that made her feel smaller. One afternoon, a group of children pressed their noses against the glass display where Myra sat. Their eyes were curious, but one voice rang loud and clear above their chatter. "Why, look at that sad old mirror. It's cracked all to bits." The woman stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Because sometimes what's broken shows more than what's perfect. You just have to know where to look." A silence fell over the children, their young minds struggling to grasp the idea. One small boy reached out a tentative finger to trace the crack and smiled. "It's like a map." Myra's reflection shimmered in that touch like a secret finally told, but the cracks could not be ignored forever. One evening, as the wind howled outside, a sudden sharp knock at the door startled the shopkeeper. A man in a crisp suit entered, his eyes cold and calculating. "This mirror must be removed," he declared. "It's damaged beyond repair. The shop needs something new, something perfect to attract customers." The shopkeeper hesitated, eyes flicking between the man and Myra. She has value," he said quietly. The man laughed. "Value only to those looking for flaws." Myra felt a shiver run down her brittle frame like a storm inside her glass. The thought of being thrown away, forgotten, shattered beyond salvage, crushed the little hope that had been growing. That night, as the shop closed and shadows filled the corners, the woman returned. She gently lifted Myra from the dusty shelf and carried her to the back room, where a single candle flickered against the dark. "I see you," she whispered, wiping a tear from her cheek. "Not for how you look, but for who you are." Myra reflected the soft candlelight in jagged patterns, a dance of imperfection that seemed more beautiful than any flawless image. The woman sat beside her and pulled from her bag a small, rough-bound notebook. Opening it carefully, she began to speak, not to Myra, but aloud as if the words might catch and hold like the cracks themselves. "I used to think being perfect meant never breaking, never showing the scars. That if I was anything less, I was no one. But what if broken isn't the end?" Myra listened quietly, her fractured heart stirring with a strange new courage. Outside, the night deepened, and the wind softened to a lullaby. Days passed, and the woman returned with books and stories, sitting with Myra for hours in the quiet back room. She told tales of flawed heroes and shattered heroes who found strength not in perfection, but in the pieces they carried. Sometimes she traced the cracks gently, as if reading Braille. But despite this growing bond, each morning Myra faced the cold reality of the shop and the world outside, where broken was something to hide, to discard. One afternoon, the woman wheeled in a wooden crate, covered in dust and worn with time. "I want to show you something," she said, unlocking the crate with a small key. Inside lay fragments of an old, broken statue, marble pieces chipped and chipped again, rough and jagged. Yet there was a strange beauty in the cracked stone, as if every break was a testament, a story of survival. Myra's cracks gleamed in the candlelight, reflecting the same story of resilience. That night the woman leaned close and whispered, "You don't have to hide. You carry your story in every crack. And sometimes that story is more precious than perfection." But even as the words settled, shadows gathered beyond the shop. Change was coming, and Myra knew that soon she would be forced to confront the world's harsh judgment once more. Still, something inside her was shifting. The broken mirror might never reflect a perfect image, but maybe, just maybe, she could be more than her cracks. And then, one morning, the bell above the door rang out sharper than usual. The shopkeeper's face was pale as he called to the woman. "There's a visitor, someone important." The door creaked open, and a tall figure stepped inside. Their eyes scanned the dusty shelves, then paused on Myra. For a long moment, silence stretched across the room like a thick fog. The figure stepped closer, their gaze steady and unblinking. The woman looked to Myra and whispered, "This is the moment. Are you ready?" Myra shimmered, the fractures catching the light as if preparing to tell the story she had held for so long. The visitor bent forward and spoke softly. "I have heard there is a mirror here unlike any other. A broken mirror that reflects more than just faces. I want to see it for myself." Myra's heart trembled, and then the voice of the woman, calm and sure. "Let me show you." The mirror's cracked surface glistened alive, as if waiting to reveal something no one had dared to see before. The sage took a deep breath and began. "Once upon a time, the sage began softly, "there was a cracked stone lying forgotten at the foot of a mountain. This stone wasn't big or shiny like the precious gems travelers sought on their journeys. Instead, it was rough and uneven, speckled with lines and gaps where pieces had chipped away over years of storms." The visitor and the woman both leaned closer, as Myra's jagged surface caught the candlelight, weaving a mosaic of shadow and glow. "This stone," the sage continued, "felt worthless because it was incomplete. It wished to be smooth, to sparkle, to be carried away by someone who would admire it. But no one did. Instead, it lay among countless others, whole stones, smooth stones, shining stones, while it felt invisible. One spring, when the mountain stream swelled with melted snow, the stone began to tremble. The rushing water carried sands and smaller rocks that hammered at its surface, breaking it further. The stone feared it was being destroyed, shattered into useless fragments. Suddenly, the sage's voice softened, but the stone did not break apart. It changed. The relentless water, instead of destroying, carved the stone into a unique shape, one that fit perfectly into the crevice of the mountain. It became a shelter for mosses, an anchor for budding plants, and a resting place for mountain birds. The cracks that the stone once wished to hide became paths for life, places of growth and beauty. Rather than being brokenness, the stone's imperfections were its strength and purpose. The visitor's eyes glistened as the sage finished. "Perfection is not being untouched or flawless. It is about what your cracks enable, the story they tell, and the life they hold." The woman turned to Myra, her voice steady with new conviction. "You see, Myra, like the stone, your cracks hold a history no perfect glass can. You reflect life's truth, fragmented, resilient, uniquely beautiful." Myra's fractured surface shimmered with a newfound glow, as if the candlelight was alive inside her. The sage looked around the room, his gaze warm. "Do you understand now? Sometimes we believe being whole means being without flaws, but often our cracks are what make us hold the most light. The challenge is to see that ourselves, even when the world judges us otherwise. The visitor nodded slowly, face touched by quiet emotion. I see it. Your cracks, Myra, aren't breaks, they're maps. Maps of survival, courage, and beauty born from struggle. The woman smiled gently, brushing an errant tear from her cheek. And that, dear mirror, is enough. Myra felt a warmth spread through every fissure. For so long she had feared her brokenness would repel, isolate, and condemn her. But in these words she found a mirror of her own soul, scarred, imperfect, yet deeply valuable. The next morning, the sun cast gentle rays inside the old shop. The woman placed Myra on an easel in the front window where the light could reach her fully. Passers-by lingered longer, some stopping to trace the cracks with their eyes, others pausing to smile quietly, touched by something more than mere reflection. Myra noticed a few faces, once full of judgment, now looking closer, deeper. Children again ran to her, whispering about her patterns that resembled stars and rivers. The shopkeeper, Thomas, watched with surprise and hinted pride. The transformation wasn't sudden or grand. It was slow, delicate, like dawn's first light threading through a fog. In the weeks that followed, the woman returned daily, carrying books, stories, and sometimes just silence. She spoke softly to Myra about accepting imperfection, about gentleness toward oneself, about how scars do not diminish worth but deepen it. Myra's fractures no longer felt like prisons. She began to understand that by revealing the stories within those cracks, she offered something rarer than flawless clarity. She offered truth and connection. But every journey of acceptance faces obstacles. One afternoon, a harsh storm swept through the town, rattling windows and booming thunder like a furious drum. The shop's old wooden door burst open, and in rushed a young man, soaked and breathless. He looked at Myra with disbelief. "This mirror, it's shattered. How can anyone want this?" He sneered, stepping closer. Thomas stepped protectively in front of Myra, voice low but firm. "Maybe it's not about wanting something flawless. Maybe it's about seeing beyond the surface." The young man scoffed, but the woman merely smiled gently. Sometimes what's cracked brings light in unexpected ways. The storm passed, but that confrontation lingered like a shadow in Myra's mind. Doubt crept at the edges. Was she really worth keeping? Could she ever reflect beauty? Could anyone truly see beyond brokenness? That evening, as rain pattered like soft fingers against the roof, the woman sat beside Myra again, placing a delicate vase filled with wildflowers nearby. "Remember the stone. It did not choose its cracks, but it chose how to exist with them. You have that choice too." She reached toward Myra, tracing a broken line with reverence. "Be patient with yourself. Share your truth little by little. The world might not understand at first, but hearts will recognize what is real." Myra felt something swell in her, hope mingled with the quiet strength of acceptance. Days turned into weeks. At first, only a few visitors paused to look at Myra without turning away, but small moments began rippling outward. An old woman sighed as she paused before Myra, whispering, "I see my own fractures here. Thank you." A young artist sketched the mirror's jagged reflections, inspired by its imperfect beauty. A mother cradling her newborn smiled, saying, "Life isn't smooth, neither are we." This mirror sees that. Meanwhile, the young man from the storm returned unannounced. He stood silently, watching Myra bathed in golden afternoon light. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he turned to Thomas, softer this time. "I think I've been too quick to judge." This acceptance wasn't the end of Myra's journey, but it was a beginning, the start of a newfound purpose. Each morning, Myra reflected faces and stories, no longer hiding her cracks but celebrating the light that shone through them. She was no longer simply a mirror but a storyteller, a keeper of shared humanity. The woman packed up her books one cool autumn day and turned to Myra. "I have to leave now, but I promise, your story will be carried by those who need it. You taught me that beauty comes not from perfection, but from embracing the broken parts that make us whole." Myra caught her own fractured reflection, sparkling with a strength she had never known. That day, the shop's window glowed with a warm light, inviting anyone willing to see beauty in the real and imperfect. And so Myra discovered that brokenness is not a curse, but a passage, a reminder that what makes us vulnerable also makes us powerful. Her cracks were no longer wounds but pathways of light, each telling the story of survival, courage, and above all, self-love. Her reflection was never perfect, but it was always true. This story shows us that we don't need to be perfect to be valuable. Sometimes the cracks, scars, and imperfections are where our true beauty and strength lie. And you, how many times have you hidden your flaws, trying to polish away what makes you unique? How often have you felt unworthy because you are not flawless? What if, instead, those fractures you've been trying to hide are exactly what connect you to others in the deepest way? As Myra and the cracked stone teach us, it's not about erasing the broken pieces or pretending to be perfect. It's about embracing them, seeing that your cracks carry light, wisdom, and story.